The camera whirred, its mechanical hum a steady counterpoint to the thrum of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. 25,000 feet over the azure expanse of the Mediterranean, Flight Lieutenant Adrian Warburton sliced his modified Spitfire through the wisps of cloud. The date was March 18, 1943, a day that should have been routine, a day that would become a legend. His orders were not just clear, they were absolute. He was to fly to the Strait of Sicily, locate and photograph a German supply convoy, and return to his base in Malta. That was it. No engagement, no heroics, just pictures. Allied command was on the verge of launching a massive offensive, and the intelligence locked away in those photographs was considered priceless. They had to know with certainty what the Germans were shipping to their beleaguered Afrika Korps. The aircraft Warburton flew, a Spitfire PR Mark IV, was a creature purpose-built for this exact kind of mission. It was a phantom, a ghost. Stripped of its heavy armor plating and most of its weaponry to maximize speed and, crucially, range. It was a thoroughbred racehorse, not a warhorse. All it carried for defense were two .303 Browning machine guns, a paltry armament that was barely enough to scare off a seagull, let alone a determined enemy fighter. Its true weapons were the 8 high-resolution cameras nestled in its fuselage and wings, silent eyes that would capture the enemy's secrets. The pilots of photo reconnaissance units were a special breed, operating under the strictest protocols imaginable. See the target, photograph it, and run home. That was the mantra. They were too valuable to be risked in combat. Their highly specialized aircraft were too rare to be lost in pointless dogfights. The intelligence they gathered was far too critical to be gambled away in a duel of aerial machismo. But as Warburton descended through 20,000 feet, angling his Spitfire to get the perfect, clear shots of the convoy steaming below, his eyes caught a glint of movement against the endless blue. Then another, and another. He counted them. 12. 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109s, climbing hard, their distinctive shark-like silhouettes unmistakable. They were the convoy's escort, and they had just seen him. Worse, much worse. They were skillfully positioning themselves between him and Malta, between him and home. They were cutting off his escape. The standard procedure, the one drilled into every reconnaissance pilot, was screaming in his mind, "Run." Push the throttle to the firewall, climb for the heavens, and use the Spitfire's superior high-altitude performance to leave the Messerschmitts gasping in the thin air below. His stripped-down aircraft was one of the fastest things in the sky. It could outrun almost any interceptor. But running meant failing. Running meant the convoy would slip through, its cargo of tanks, guns, and men reaching North Africa unopposed. It meant Allied intelligence would stay blind, their offensive planning compromised. It meant another mission would have to be sent, and another, likely with the same result. German fighters forcing the pilot to abort. The game would continue, and the Allies would lose. In the span of a few heartbeats, Warburton processed the tactical nightmare laid out before him. A dozen Bf 109s flown by experienced Luftwaffe pilots, judging by the crisp discipline of their formation. His Spitfire, with its 2 pop guns and maybe 600 rounds of ammunition in total. To any sane pilot, the odds weren't just long, they were suicidal. But the Germans had made one critical, fatal miscalculation, an assumption based on every rule in their book. They thought they were intercepting a defenseless photoplane, flown by a pilot whose only instinct would be self-preservation. They expected him to run. They were positioning themselves for an easy chase, a simple kill to add to their tally. They were not positioning themselves for a fight, and they had no idea who was in the cockpit. Before we dive into what happens next, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? And more importantly, have you ever heard of Adrian Warby Warburton, one of the most decorated and arguably one of the most insane reconnaissance pilots of the entire Second World War? Drop a comment below. I'd also love to know your thoughts on this. When is it right for a soldier to break their orders? You see, Adrian Warburton was not your typical by-the-book RAF officer, far from it. At just 24 years old, he had forged a reputation across the entire Mediterranean theater as the most aggressive, most audacious, and most successful recon pilot in the sky.
He'd flown over 300 missions. He'd been shot down twice, crash-landed 4 times, and simply kept coming back for more, each time with a little more grit and a little less regard for the rules. Other pilots whispered he was reckless, a madman with a death wish.
His commanders, shaking their heads in a mixture of exasperation and awe, called him invaluable. The Germans simply called him a menace, putting a $5,000 bounty on his head, the highest price offered for any reconnaissance pilot in the theater. What made Warburton so incredibly dangerous wasn't just his preternatural skill at flying an aircraft to its absolute limits. It was his complete and utter disregard for standard procedure when he believed the situation demanded a different approach. He'd been court-martialed once for launching unauthorized, low-level strafing attacks on German positions during what were supposed to be simple photo runs. He'd been grounded twice for blatant insubordination, and he'd been promoted 3 times for achieving extraordinary results that no other pilot could even dream of. His Spitfire might have been designed for reconnaissance, but Warburton had fought tooth and nail to keep those 2 machine guns. Most PR pilots had all their weapons removed to save every last ounce of weight to gain that extra few miles per hour of speed. Warburton had argued fiercely that 2 guns were infinitely better than none, even if it cost him 50 pounds of weight and a knot or 2 of airspeed. His squadron commander had reluctantly agreed, probably with a sinking feeling that Warburton would, inevitably, find a way to use them. Now, as he watched 12 Messerschmitts climbing towards him like a pack of wolves, Warburton made a calculation that would have sent any other pilot into a cold sweat. The German fighters were spreading out, forming a wide interception line to blanket his possible escape routes. They were confident. No, they were overconfident. They thought this was a done deal. Warburton's hand moved with practiced calm. He clicked the safety office 2 guns. And then he did the last thing in the world the Germans expected. He rolled the Spitfire inverted, hung there for a breathtaking second against the blue canvas of the sky, and pushed the stick forward. He was diving straight into the heart of the German formation. The move took the Germans completely, utterly by surprise. It was a violation of the natural order. Reconnaissance pilots didn't attack, they ran. That was the fundamental rule of the sky. But here was this lone Spitfire screaming down at them at over 450 miles per hour, a blue-gray blur of controlled insanity. The pilot of the lead Bf 109 never even saw him coming. Warburton opened fire at 300 yards, a long shot, but his gunnery was impeccable. He watched his tracers walk directly across the Messerschmitt's canopy and engine cowling. Chunks of metal ripped away from the German fighter. A plume of white glycol smoke, the telltale sign of a mortal wound to the engine, erupted from its nose. The Bf 109 lazily rolled onto its back and began its long final fall to the sea, trailing a tail of fire. 1 down, 11 to go. The German formation shattered, confusion reigned. Pilots broke hard in every direction, their radio frequencies flooding with panicked shouts as they tried to comprehend what had just happened. A sheep had just turned on the wolves and bitten one of them to death. In that brief, priceless moment of chaos, Warburton used his momentum. He pulled up hard, the G-forces squeezing him into his seat, bleeding off his speed in a gut-wrenching vertical climb that brought him soaring back above the scattered formation. This was a trick he'd learned not from RAF manuals, but from obsessively studying German fighter tactics. He knew the Bf 109 was a beast in a dive and packed a heavier punch with its cannons, but he also knew his Spitfire could outturn it and, at this altitude, had a slight edge in its rate of climb. He wasn't trying to dogfight 12 aircraft at once. That was suicide. He was using surprise and superior positioning to pick them off, one by one. A second Bf 109, its pilot likely enraged at the sight of his leader being shot down by a mere recce plane, pulled up to follow him. It was a decision born of anger, not tactics, a fatal mistake. The German pilot was fixated on revenge, a red mist clouding his judgment. Warburton let him close, let him get confident. 200 yards. He could probably see the black crosses on the German's wings. Then, with a flick of his wrists and a kick of rudder, he snap-rolled to the right and pulled the Spitfire into a tight climbing spiral. The Messerschmitt tried to follow, its engine screaming, but it couldn't match the Spitfire's nimbleness. It was like watching a bull try to follow a matador.
As the German pilot struggled to bring his guns to bear, Warburton reversed his turn, dropping in perfectly behind the enemy fighter. He squeezed the trigger. One quick, disciplined burst. Ammunition was more precious than gold right now. The .303 rounds stitched across the Bf-109's tail section, and it simply disintegrated.
The aircraft tumbled out of control, a broken toy falling from the sky. Seconds later, a small white parachute blossomed against the blue. 2 down, 10 to go. The remaining Germans were starting to get their act together. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by cold, professional fury. These were skilled pilots, and they were angry. Warburton could hear the sharp, guttural chatter on his radio. He didn't speak a word of German, but he understood the tone perfectly. They were coordinating. They were coming for him as a pack. This was the critical moment. Against 10 fighters working in concert, even a pilot of his skill couldn't survive for long. He had to break their coordination, shatter their teamwork, and force them back into individual duels where he could use surprise and positioning to his advantage again. He spotted a pair of Bf-109s climbing on his left, trying to get above him to gain that critical altitude advantage. Standard procedure would be to turn away, to run from the threat. So, naturally, Warburton turned towards them. His unexpected aggression completely threw off their timing. They had expected him to evade. They had not expected him to attack them while they were climbing. Warburton fired a long burst at the lead aircraft. Longer than he should have. He could feel himself eating through his precious ammunition, but he needed to make a statement. The result was worth the cost. His rounds found the Messerschmitts fuel tank. The aircraft vanished in a brilliant, silent fireball that momentarily lit up the sky. 3 down, 9 to go. The wingman, horrified, broke hard right and dove for the deck, wanting no part of this insane photo pilot. Warburton let him go. Chasing was a rookie mistake. Chasing was how you got tunnel vision. Chasing was how you got killed when you were outnumbered 9 to 1. The mantra was simple: stay fast, stay high, and control the engagement. But his ammunition status was now critical. He figured he had maybe 150 rounds left. Against 9 fighters, that was less than 20 rounds per plane. Every single bullet had to count. He didn't have time to dwell on it. 4 more Bf-109s were climbing from below, working as a single coordinated team. Smart pilots. They were executing a classic pincer movement, trying to trap him between a group above and a group below, forcing him to split his attention. Against a normal fighter with a full ammunition load, it was a dangerous tactic. Against a reconnaissance plane that should have been halfway back to Malta by now, it should have been devastating. Warburton's mind was a whirlwind of calculations, angles, closure rates, firing solutions. The lower group would be in firing range first. He had maybe 10 seconds. He pushed the nose of the Spitfire down, diving towards the 4 climbing fighters at maximum speed. Again, he did the unexpected. They expected him to pull up, to try and evade their attack. He didn't. He flew straight at them, a head-on pass. At 400 yards, he opened fire on the leader of the pack. One short, sharp burst. Pure deflection shooting, one of the hardest skills in aerial combat. The Messerschmitt's engine exploded in a shower of black smoke and orange flame. The crippled aircraft snapped violently to the left, straight into the path of its own wingman. The 2 planes collided in a sickening crunch of metal, tumbling from the sky as a single, tangled, burning wreck. 5 down, 7 to go. But the high-speed attack run had cost him dearly. He had bled off his speed and his altitude. The higher group of Bf-109s was now diving on him, and he was too slow to outrun them, too low to outclimb them. He heard the terrifying rattle of their 20mm cannons opening fire. Bright lines of tracer fire streaked past his canopy. Crack! Something slammed into his left wing. Probably 7.92mm machine gun fire, thankfully. Nothing critical, but a stark reminder of his mortality. He yanked the Spitfire into a violent defensive spiral, pulling G-forces so hard his vision grayed at the edges, and his body felt like it was made of lead. The Bf-109s, their dive speed working against them, overshot.
Warburton reversed his turn, clawing his way back up, fighting for every precious foot of altitude. A single Messerschmitt pilot stayed with him, a very good pilot, matching his climb. This one was persistent, this one was dangerous. Warburton watched him in his rearview mirror, a black speck growing larger, calculating the closing speed. The German was gaining, slowly but surely. His Daimler-Benz engine gave him just enough of a power advantage to close the gap. 100 yards. The German opened fire. Cannon shells punched through Warburton's tail section. The whole aircraft shuddered violently. Warning lights flickered on his dashboard like angry red eyes. But he held his course, steady, waiting. 50 yards. The German was right on his tail now, confident. This was an easy kill.
The end of the line for the crazy Englishman. At that exact moment, Warburton did something that defied all logic of air combat. He chopped his throttle completely, cutting all power to his engine, and simultaneously deployed his landing flaps. The Spitfire decelerated so violently it was like hitting a brick wall in midair. The Bf 109, caught completely off guard, shot past him as if it had been launched from a catapult. For 2 perfect, beautiful seconds, the German fighter filled Warburton's gun sight. A perfect, no-deflection shot. He squeezed the trigger and held it down, firing everything he had left. One long, final, desperate burst. The Messerschmitts simply came apart under the sustained onslaught. The wings folded up, the fuselage broke in two. The pilot never had a chance to bail out. 6 down, 6 to go. And Warburton's guns were empty. The 6 remaining Bf 109s regrouped, circling cautiously below him. They had seen what happened. They saw no return fire. They finally realized the truth. The reconnaissance plane was out of ammunition. He was a sitting duck. Now it was just a matter of time. They spread out, preparing for a final, coordinated execution-style attack that Warburton had no way to defend against. But he wasn't defenseless, not completely. He still had his speed, he still had his altitude, and he still had the most important weapon any pilot possesses, a brilliant tactical mind that refused to quit. And he had something else too, something the Germans couldn't possibly know about. His cameras were still running. And then he remembered something from his mission briefing, a small but vital detail. The convoy below was approaching a specific sector known to be patrolled by British submarines. And where there were friendly submarines, there were twitchy convoy gunners. He had read the reports. German fighters had been fired on and even shot down by their own ships when dogfights got too close to the convoy. The gunners just shot at anything and everything that moved. It was an insane gamble. But everything about the last 10 minutes had been an insane gamble. He rolled the Spitfire inverted one last time and dove, straight down, straight for the convoy. The altimeter unwound with terrifying speed. 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000. The 6 Bf 109s followed, sensing the kill was finally at hand. They were closing in, their cannons charged, ready to tear him to shreds. At 5,000 feet, Warburton leveled off, streaking towards the convoy at wave-top height. And the German ships did exactly what he had prayed they would do. They opened fire, indiscriminately. The sky erupted, the air filled with a wall of flak. Ugly black puffs of 88mm shells blossomed all around the diving Messerschmitts. Deadly, glowing streams of lighter 20mm tracer fire crisscrossed the sky. The German fighter pilots scattered, their perfect attack formation breaking apart in a desperate attempt to avoid being killed by their own side. Warburton, meanwhile, threaded the needle. He flew through the storm of steel, weaving between the ships at just 300 feet. It was suicidal flying, but the convoy gunners were all tracking the higher, more obvious targets, the Bf 109s. They paid no attention to the single, low-flying aircraft that was the cause of all the chaos. He cleared the last ship in the convoy and banked hard left, his wingtip practically skimming the waves. He glanced at his mirror. The flak barrage was still raging behind him. He watched, with the kind of detached fascination, as one of the Bf 109s flew straight into a burst of 88mm fire. The aircraft simply vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was just a cloud of black smoke and falling debris. He saw another get hit by a stream of 20mm cannon fire, trailing thick smoke as it limped away from the fight. 7 down, 4 to go, 2 by friendly fire. The remaining 4 Messerschmitts had finally had enough. They had lost more than half their number to a single reconnaissance plane. Their fuel was running dangerously low after the prolonged high-speed combat, and their quarry, the man who should have been an easy kill, was still alive, still flying, and now heading for home. They broke off the engagement, turning their noses back towards Sicily. Warburton kept his Spitfire low, hugging the contours of the sea until he was absolutely certain they weren't following. Only then did he allow himself to climb, gently nursing his battered aircraft back toward Malta. The left wing had more holes than metal. The tail section was shredded. His oil pressure was dropping, slowly but steadily, but the Merlin engine was still running, and the controls, miraculously, still responded. And, most critically of all, the cameras were intact. They had recorded the entire unbelievable engagement. When Adrian Warburton landed his Spitfire at Lucca Airfield, the ground crews just stood and stared in stunned silence. The plane looked like it had been put through an industrial shredding machine. They would later count 47 separate bullet and cannon holes. The base intelligence officer, a man who lived by the book, stormed out to the runway and demanded to know why a reconnaissance pilot had returned with combat damage. Warburton, climbing wearily from the cockpit, gave a simple, deadpan response. Ran into some Messerschmitts. They objected to being photographed. When the film from his cameras was developed, the intelligence officers couldn't believe what they were seeing. First, there were the photographs of the convoy, perfectly clear, exactly what they had asked for. But then there was the other footage. The gun cameras, which recorded automatically whenever he fired, documented 6 confirmed kills, plain as day. The mission cameras, which had been running throughout the flight, had captured 2 more Bf-109s colliding after his head-on attack, and another being utterly destroyed by its own flak. The final tally was staggering: 9 confirmed kills and 2 probables from damaged aircraft seen fleeing, plus the complete, vital reconnaissance photos that had started the whole insane affair. The intelligence value was enormous, but the psychological impact was even greater. A single reconnaissance pilot in a stripped-down Spitfire had engaged 12 elite Luftwaffe fighters, and not only survived, but had decimated them. He had brought back his damaged aircraft, and, crucially, the gun camera footage that proved every single one of his incredible claims. The story spread like wildfire through both Allied and German air forces. Luftwaffe pilots in the Mediterranean began treating RAF reconnaissance Spitfires with a newfound and very healthy respect. They could no longer assume the lone, unarmed photoplane was an easy victim. For all they knew, it could be carrying guns and be piloted by someone just as crazy as Adrian Warburton. The RAF, however, had a problem. Warburton had, once again, directly and flagrantly disobeyed a direct order. He had engaged the enemy when explicitly told not to. He had risked a valuable aircraft and an irreplaceable pilot. By every rule and regulation in the book, he deserved to be disciplined. He probably deserved another court-martial. Instead, they gave him the Distinguished Service Order, one of the highest awards for gallantry. His citation praised his extraordinary courage and exceptional skill in aerial combat while completing a vital reconnaissance mission under extreme circumstances. The citation made no mention of the fact that he'd broken every order he'd been given. It didn't need to. Everyone understood. Sometimes the person in the cockpit, the one with their life on the line, sees the situation more clearly than the commander sitting safely behind a desk reading briefing papers. Warburton had assessed the tactical situation in a flash. He had recognized that the only way to complete his mission was to engage the enemy, and then he had executed that decision perfectly. Military historians now study Warburton's engagement as a textbook example of the principle of economy of force. He destroyed or disabled 9 enemy aircraft while expending less than 600 rounds of ammunition. That's roughly 65 rounds per kill. To put that in perspective, most fighter pilots in World War II expended thousands of rounds for every victory they claimed.
His success wasn't just luck, it was a combination of factors. First, surprise. The Germans expected him to run. His aggression caught them completely off balance. Second, tactics. He fought a vertical battle, using energy management instead of getting into a turning fight he couldn't win. Third, discipline. With so little ammunition, every single burst was aimed with lethal precision. And fourth, and perhaps most importantly, tactical genius. When his ammunition ran out, he used the terrain, in this case the enemy convoy itself, as a weapon to continue degrading the enemy's capability. But the most crucial element was that Warburton understood his real mission. He wasn't just ordered to take photographs, he was ordered to gather intelligence that was vital to the Allied war effort. In his mind, engaging those fighters wasn't a violation of his mission, it was the only way to complete it. A dead pilot brings back no photographs. The photos he delivered revealed that the Germans were shipping brand new Tiger tanks to Tunisia. Armed with this critical intelligence, Allied command immediately adjusted their tactical plans. When the offensive launched 2 weeks later, Allied forces were prepared for the heavy German armor.
The intelligence Warburton gathered, while simultaneously wiping out nearly an entire squadron of German fighters, directly contributed to the Allied victory in the North African campaign. Warburton continued flying reconnaissance missions throughout 1943 and early 1944, accumulating more decorations than almost any other RAF pilot of the war. But on April 12, 1944, he took off on a reconnaissance mission over Germany and never returned. His Spitfire vanished somewhere over Bavaria. No wreckage was ever found, no grave was ever confirmed. He simply disappeared. Decades later, researchers uncovered evidence suggesting that Warburton may have been secretly working with British intelligence, conducting espionage missions under the guise of reconnaissance flights. His final fatal mission may have involved far more than just photography. The full truth remains classified to this day. What isn't classified is the powerful lesson Warburton taught the world on that March day over the Mediterranean. He proved that rigid adherence to mission parameters can sometimes be the enemy of mission success. Modern military doctrine now embraces this concept, known as mission command, empowering the individual on the front lines to understand the intent behind their orders and adapt their execution to the circumstances they face. Warburton's commanders didn't tell him to fight 12 fighters, they told him to get the intelligence and come home. He understood that on that day, achieving those two objectives required a fight. The Germans who met him in the sky that day probably went to their graves never fully understanding what happened. They intercepted a lone, unarmed photoplane and lost 9 of their own. By all the logic of warfare, it was impossible. But Adrian Warburton didn't fight by their logic. He fought with surprise, skill, and an unbreakable commitment to getting the job done. He was ordered to take pictures. He came back with 9 kills and saved an entire military campaign. In doing so, he proved that the most dangerous weapon in any arsenal isn't a camera or a gun. It's the judgment to know when to break the rules and the courage to act on that knowledge when everyone else expects you to run.